All right, we're back on our high-tech device here.
Are we alive?
We are live.
Okay, you wanted to talk about various things, and I'm with you on any of them, but it might be nice for me to hear what you were saying and to lead you into primal therapy. You were talking about the screamers.
Yeah, so I went to a concert the other night. I used to be in a heavy metal band, and I was a vocalist in a heavy metal band for a while.
A screamer.
Yep. And I was just saying, like, one can imagine why another person would want to scream into a mic at a crowd of people, right? It's like it's an emotional experience of just expressing oneself and how angry one
the Greeks did it with the tragedies. I mean, they saw Oedipus, the Oedipus Rex, they saw Oedipus the King, and they didn't understand about Freud's Oedipal complex. They were 2,500 years before Freud. But they went home, they felt liberated because it expressed something deep in them. It was a catharsis. And you would, basically what you're talking about is catharsis.
Right.
And it's all very well. But let me put it this way. It's only part of the answer. And I think when you were talking about it, I was thinking about something I taught when I was teaching psychology. And I did a section on human consciousness, and I used various people to illustrate various aspects of human consciousness. And one of them was Primal Therapy by Arthur Janov. Are you familiar with his name? No. It's interesting because he did some very interesting work back in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, he would take people all the way back to their birth. He would have them go through the birth trauma for many people. Some, like one woman who, like 25 hours in a mother in labor. You know what I mean? You could only imagine how the fetus was trying to get out of there. And so she couldn't stand in line behind people. She'd want to kill everybody in front of her. This just comes back to me. I probably taught this over 30 years ago. Sure, wait, what am I saying? I taught this 40 years ago. But I remember that example. And interestingly enough, the white-haired guy used to have interviews, I've forgotten his name, very popular guy. He had Arthur Janov on his program one morning, and I dragged the TV into my classroom, and we watched him doing an interview. And then Janov pointed to a woman in the audience and who got up and talked about her own birth experiences. So instead of just a screaming, that was part of Janov's thing. There's a lot more to it. There's actually going back and having what you call, what I think they call an abreaction, which is the same experience. Only this time you're doing it with under tutelage of the therapist and your own maybe developed awareness. And so you begin to liberate by doing that. Supposedly, it's very, I mean, you can only imagine how nearly impossible it is for us to liberate ourselves from all of our programs.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we did, you know, Ken Wilber and I, in my doctoral dissertation, said the same thing. If you could liberate the entire organism of its negativities, is what I call them, in various ways, it would experience, he called it cosmic consciousness. I called it universal consciousness, because you'd be connected to all the physicality. Because your body is just part of the giant physicality of the universe.
Right.
So,
and any level of suffering that we experience is in relation to a disconnect.
Absolutely. Well, ego life is a disconnect. I'm going to say it basically. People talk about the human condition and all this and that, but I don't know if they fully realize what they're talking about. It's as if they're looking at something on this side of their vision and they don't see it, but they just know that we're screwed up.
Right.
Oh, this is the human condition. What? They were always at each other's throat and all that. Let's go to the foundation of it. Let's put a few labels on it. We understand what it is. It's called ego, which is what? It's not just your sense of self, it's your sense of self in opposition to the rest of the world. There is self, and then there is not self. And think about what lies on the other side of not self. There's self, and then maybe your family, and a few friends, and maybe your dog, and all this and that. But do you really identify with all of existence, all of sentient existence? Hardly. I have neighbors that love dogs, but they go out and kill deer.
Mm.
You know, or they shoot the squirrels that eat their apples and stuff like that. There are demarcations, and there's a great deal that falls on the side of the not self, like what's going on in other planets and other planetary systems right now.
Mm-hmm.
Great suffering and stuff. I don't care, says that. He might not say it. He might want to pretend he's a liberal. Oh yes, my heart bleeds. No, it doesn't. He's still having a good time. You know what I mean? The self is so limited in its perception, and unfortunately there is this thing that I label pathological selfishness. Mm-hmm. And we come across it all the time. And in our culture, it's almost idealized, it's idolized. If you're a highly competitive person, you're considered to be a great person. Mm-hmm. And I look at, again, I probably mentioned this before, I look at Ripken, the great possessor of the consecutive games played streak, over 2,500 games without coming out. But his brother and other people have described him as extremely competitive, so you couldn't play ping pong with him without him trying to devastate you.
Right.
It's just that kind of personality, and you can see that. I did mention this before,
right.
And I'm not knocking him. A great ball player and all that, and a good guy, a generally good person. He doesn't go out and do bad things as far as we know. But that's his thing to deal with. Right. And you may say, well, he's lived a successful life. He'll live and he'll die. And that's right. Just like a taper, he will come to an end. And I think there's more to this life than just living this life and then dying. Sure. Because when you're going to die and you're going to go into the void, take a look at the terror that will produce in people who are totally dedicated to existing in this life. Mm-hmm. There has to be some kind of reconciliation. A lot of times for people it appears that way because they lost their energy on the deathbed and they're drugged. And so they look like they're fine. I have a different value system at work here.
Sure. I mean, it's... The body's reaction is certainly to claw, like someone drowning, clawing at whatever it can get its hands on, right? To stay alive, including producing thought, right? A lot of people their entire life flashes before their eyes when they...
You've heard that, or maybe right? Some parts of it.
It's supposedly, from what I've heard, it's from trying to figure out a way not to die by recalling all the
Oh, that's interesting.
Experiences. Yeah.
That's interesting, sure.
Going back to suffering, and it's amazing that that we can forget from moment to moment about what our essential existence is.
That's what it is, and most people don't even know the name of the game. Mm-hmm. See, there's something called a master game. There's a book by that name, brilliant book. Worth reading. Mm-hmm. I'll give it to you. I have it from years ago, back when I got my 60s and 70s education. It was quite extensive, and the master game is the Buddha game, or the Krishnamurti game, the Gurdjieff game. It's the game of becoming awake, mm-hmm. and transforming your entire world by becoming awake. Mm-hmm. Most people don't even value this. You can't even talk to most people about this. If somebody's watching this on YouTube, not many do, right? Conversations are pretty private.
All 7 subscribers can't be wrong.
7? Oh my God, overwhelmed.
I think it might be 12. I don't know.
But I wonder how much they understand. I would love it if they would value it so that they'd get involved in a dialogue, mm-hmm. and maybe involve other people, you know. Mm-hmm. But a lot of this is shockingly new. I taught this stuff when I was teaching high school. The kids are stunned. I told you about that. I would have a class of 25. I'd look up and there'd be 45 kids in the class because they'd be coming back from the last class to hear it again, because it's all about yourself. Mm-hmm. It's all about the most personal aspect of selfhood, mm-hmm. and the values and all the rest. And so it's an existential thing. It's basically what it was. only with all the readings attended to it that were not called existential readings, psychological people. Love and Will by Rollo May. Things like that I would assign to kids, and we talk, and it would always turn into something extremely personal, so they were deeply interested. For several years, anyway, it went well. It was stunning to them. Could nobody ever talk to them about any of this? Certainly the teachers in the school had no understanding of it. I mean, if you want to find dumb people, go to a grade school and look at most of the teachers. Stuck with their head stuck in a dark place where the sun doesn't shine, pretending that their terrible feelings of inferiority that drove them into teaching rather than to some other field, okay, has disappeared, and now they are superior beings because they're hanging around with kids all the time. They think they're superior. It's amazing. I admit, look, I was part of that thing, but I didn't have those experiences. I never felt superior. And I remember a day when a kid, I was away at grad school at Boston College getting my master's in philosophy, and I came back. I had more time after my finals and at mid-season Christmas time. And so I went to pick up a few bucks, like $15 a day, to go teach back at the high school where I had taken my sabbatical. And so I walked into a class in French, and I knew how to read French, but I couldn't teach it. So, but I played with them, and we had a good time. We fooled around for several days while their teacher was out. But on that first day, some kid who's like this, got this high IQ, he challenges me, and he says, why should we learn from people who are only a bit more ignorant, a bit less ignorant than we are? And I just loved it. Oh, great. I got into it with him. And the conversation that we had, the authentic conversation that I had, you know, hey, I'm with you. You know, that's why I'm going away to real graduate school, and not going to Rhode Island College taking 30 hours after the bachelor's, 30 hours of gut courses that you could take with like this, sitting in the classroom. People would sleep in the back of the room taking these courses. You had to just be there in order to get accredited to continue to teach. A master's degree in formal philosophy, what are you, crazy? What, you have to work? And then now you think you're better than we are. No, I don't, now everybody hates you. And then when you go on to get your doctorate, and you're really studying things that they couldn't throw a stick at, you're more than hated, you're abhorred. There's a good word for your viewers. I mean, if you want to find, dumb people, if you want to find dumb people, go to a high school. Go to the English department and listen to the English teachers make mistakes in English grammar. Where, like, I was there and I had this one woman who go around singing in the corridors and stuff and saying things like, between you and I, and here's an English teacher, pretending, just pretentious people. So it was like living in a bubble. You couldn't take a real deep breath, because if you inhale that stuff and you become like that, I don't want to say things in English about the results of that. I'm sorry, I'm just ranting about this.
Yeah.
Pathological selfishness and the various ways to deal with it. They're in front of us all the time, but boy, what challenges they are. The easy way is to take a pet like this little l'enfant terrible, this terrible infant who's a monster so much, but take her and then just let your heart open up to her, and you will experience more than a catharsis. But then there are harder ways to do it, to deal with people who hurt you, use you, and then frustrate the hell out of you. You are thrown back upon yourself.
Yeah.
See, with this, the heart opens up. Like in my pyramid, I have a room that represents the heart chakra, and I told a very interesting story. I don't know if I recited it here. I might like to do that. I may like to do. In fact, I may like to do that in front of the women.
Pieces of the literature you wrote?
Yeah, I think because I sent this to Jeff Brosco, Dr. Brosco, former student but Deputy Secretary of Health, very critical of my writing. I mean, when he looks at it, he reads it from the point of view of a highly intelligent Ivy League MD, PhD, and he, yeah, I know he doesn't like all my stuff because it scares him. That's a fact. A little too dark at times in the old days, but this one he called a masterpiece, and I know that comes from a very critical point of view. So anybody who doesn't like it, we could have discussion about that person's dynamic. I would like to read it. I'll bring along a copy of it.
Sure.
And we'll have some fun with it. It's not very long.
So going back to the point on dealing with people that frustrate you and people that purposely try to harm you, and even if it's just out of their own selfishness, I think that one way to deal with that conflict, which I had mentioned right before we started, which is you're looking at like fighting a dragon. Like you approach a dragon and it's going to be a terrible thing, and you put the shield up and your hackles are up and you're all tense and everything. And I suppose the first thing in that sort of circumstance is to just be aware of yourself going through that uneasy feeling. But is there a point at which you can reach where you just let it go and just act out whatever it is that you have to do to move forward with your own life and improve it? Is there any point at which you can just release?
That's a very good question, and let me give you an answer that I conceive of from the same origin but splitting off. There's one way you make a decision. Let's say you walk away from a person who's trying to hurt you and use you. Okay? Just simply walk away. That's kind of an obvious way to do it, but you're talking about something deeper. You're talking about liberation. That's separation, right? You're talking about, is there a possibility to somehow transcend this? I think it's extremely difficult because it requires a lot of work, and it requires, Krishnamurti would tell you, pay attention, and that is the foundation of it. Zen, pay attention. Krishnamurti is radical Zen. Whether you sit or you stand or you run or you talk or you walk, it doesn't matter. You always pay attention, and so you establish a fair witness by doing that. But does that really eliminate? He says it does. Okay, here's a real point of conflict with Krishnamurti. He says you see the problem, you see it, and then you're done with it. No. Even his most ardent followers say no. You're not done with it. And he kind of, should I say the word expelled David Bohm of all people? He was grooming Bohm to be his successor, because Bohm was a genius in mathematical physics, right? Okay. And Bohm had the heart for this kind of work, even though he made some simple mistakes when he tried to do philosophy, which I can name, need not. But he had that mind to go to the heart of things as much as he possibly could. And yet, he could never get past his depression. He was a depressed personality. And Krishnamurti was angry with him over that. And I think that's the delusion that Krishnamurti's teaching presents along with the truth. And that is that if you do Krishnamurti's work, somehow you're a Buddha. And I know lots of people who think they are, because I'm aware of myself, but they are no more awake than a sleepwalker.
Well, I know that we can get caught in verbalizing this, but in a sense, we are always the cosmic consciousness, but we are also the within or experiencing the mind that interrupts that realization. It's like the hooks of the thoughts. They can present obstacles so that you can't see that. You can't experience it fully.
The
right?
question is back to a very good way to talk about it. You're back to the real question. How can I enter a higher state of consciousness where I'm no longer suffering? That's what the whole point of Buddhism was about. And his answer was to enter into a higher state of consciousness. And how you do that is through various disciplines.
Right, and I certainly the one about connecting with beings
that would be one thing.
That's-
He said you've got to detach from everything, he said, but you don't have to stop loving nature.
Right.
Well, that's part of nature. That's nature right there.
detach from the particulars, but not detach as in try to escape.
No, right.
Detach as in
not to care anymore. To
right.
Live, but a higher see. There's indifference, which is evil, and there's holy indifference, in which you can help as much as you can, but you know that you're taking water from a place with a bucket that's got a hole in it, and you're pouring it into another place, which flows back into here. So you're doing this in this life, because everything you do in this life is eventually, people are going to jump out of the window, is eventually going to wind up in that same equation. It all turns into zero.
Yeah.
But so these people think, I got to win the pennant. Now I can die. Oh my God, how shallow can we get? If my team wins the pennant, now I can die because I put so much of my life into this thing.
If I achieve this very attainable, difficult task, I can finally allow myself to be at ease. But not until then. I have to be attached to every aspect of suffering that thing. Right? That's
the desire to let go and to stop being uptight and to stop feeling obligation and to stop feeling all those things used to be elaborated or illustrated, I should say. I come out of Scituate and I'd be driving through Scituate Village, and I remember it was around the same time that I retired from teaching Johnston High School, but I'd be on my way to my new jobs, teaching at CCRI and New England Tech and Rhode Island College or Salve Regina. I'd be on my way to because I just wanted to continue teaching and to make a few bucks. And so I'd drive by this guy who apparently was a state worker who'd just gotten his reprieve. He retired. And he used to sit there on his lawn, it was a higher up kind of thing. He was up about 7 or 8 feet. And he'd sit up there and he'd be watching the cars go by all day, like, this is heaven. And then after a while, I'd see him walking up and down. He'd be taking the guy's dog for a walk after a while. And then he might be doing other things because he started to, I'm eating myself up. I can't stop. You can't stop the dynamic of the need. If you don't have a project, you get sick and die, right? And so he didn't have a project. His only project was, now I don't have to go to work, because he was the typical state worker in the first place. He's only going there to collect money. There's no work involved. It's a job, but it's not real work. It's labor.
Right, labor.
It's not work. Work is artwork, stuff that creates.
Right.
And so the dynamic continues. My whole point is you can't really just get rid of that dynamic. That's why I began this discussion with the reference to Janov's primal therapy, where he would make people go through, he used to use improvised things like a whole line of inner tubes and then covered, and the person would go through the inner tubes after undergoing other kinds of therapies. There'd be screaming. They called it screaming therapy because you'd be screaming. There's so much it's internalized in people. So he'd get them to scream, and there'd be vomiting and things like that children would do, because the whole point is so wrenching at us. And he would have people go through the tubes as a simulation of coming through the birth canal. And they would do this and go through all this. And a lot of times they would have an abreaction and they would be somewhat freed. It used to work for some people. It was part of that whole New Age movement that included Ezelin on Big Sur I told you about Esalen. I'm thinking I mentioned it last time. It's a therapeutic area. You go for all kinds of things, whether yoga or rolfing or God knows what, all kinds of meditation, all kinds of big name people would go there to teach a week or a weekend or something like that. Get all kinds of psychologists. Rollo May, I mentioned, people like that. R.D. Laing, no question. Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass. No doubt, all these people would show up. And the guy who rolfed me actually worked there for a while. And he said something very interesting as an aside for those people watching this. He said he saw people take LSD and get rolfed and their bodies opened up, like transcendentally. They just, all the stuff released. And you could see the body change. You work on a shoulder here and this side of the chest opens up.
Oh, yeah.
It's so you know about that stuff more than I do.
It's amazing.
So you'd appreciate the principles of rolfing. You wouldn't enjoy the experience.
Certainly.
Painful as hell.
Yeah. I mean, and going back to what you're saying about achievement and attachment, and that it's certainly in my realm. I've experienced myself and other people attached to the ideas of power and what you have to do to achieve that through suffering and just not being capable of letting it go, because it's so important to do that thing. And I just suppose that's the chain of the lifetime of that
People
person.
People have always looked for ways to look at. I didn't finish my story. The rest of the story is that he said the day after they tripped and their body opened up successfully, because that's what happens in rolfing. You can have mystical experiences in rolfing. Oh, really? You get higher states of consciousness after you go through it. Endorphin has a lot to do with it. But he said the day after, everything closed down as if they'd never been wrong. They'd never had the session.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, you can't do it cheating. Doing it under LSD was like cheating. It was, I bet it was spectacular. It was all gone the next day. That leads to other questions. A lot of other questions. I was watching Terrence McKenna this morning. And he was talking about his psilocybin trips and how Hawaii and stuff. And there's a guy who had more spectacular visions than most people, I think. But not necessarily more important. Again, I go back, I'm not trying to be anybody's teacher, but you always got to me, start at the foundation, and therefore the best way to try to liberate yourself is to work through the body. I think you agree with that since you're a body person. Yeah,
I mean, my job, I've been blessed with, or cursed with, putting myself in position to connect people to themselves and to their movement practice in the moment at which they're doing it, and connecting them to other people that are also doing the same thing. So it's like kind of like a tribal ritual thing. And I'm not trying to be a frickin' know-it-all god of fitness or something, but I'm just trying to get people more aware of what they're doing as they're doing it. And around other people that are doing the same thing, and then just having a good time doing that, so that it's like, it's all like flow, and it's not so much like grit and grind stuff. Although that is part of it, like that is certainly an aspect of it. It's not all the hammer. You know, I think too many people treat training like they just have to beat the shit out of themselves until they're dead tired, instead of, I suppose, instead of improving their ability to just be in alignment with what they're doing in so many different ways.
Well, I agree with that.
I guess we can close it down there. All right, let us know what you think. Leave us comments and stuff like that, and we'll see you later.